Story number 1. Every night I hit the road, driving through the dim streets, delivering food to hungry folks. It was the usual routine until I noticed something weird. A pattern in the orders, leading to the same creepy spot every time. The address was a dark, winding road tucked away from the city buzz. The houses were like shadows, hiding secrets. At first, I shrugged it off, thinking it was just a coincidence. But then, every other order pointed me down that same mysterious lane. The first time I pulled up to a worn-down house. The porch light flickered like it had seen better days. A guy with wild hair and jittery eyes answered the door. He mumbled a "thanks" without looking at me, his gaze fixed on something unseen behind me. The second visit took me to a rickety apartment building. This time it was an old woman who opened the door, her hands trembling as she took the food. When I asked if everything was okay, she just nodded, lips sealed tight. Her eyes, though, told a different story, a story of fear. With each delivery, the people got stranger, and the vibe grew colder. It was like they were part of some weird secret club, but no one wanted to spill the beans. My curiosity gnawed at me like a hungry rat. What was going on behind those closed doors? One night I decided to dig deeper. Instead of just dropping off the order, I lingered in the shadows, watching. The guy from the first house came out, glancing around like he was being hunted. He walked to the end of the street, disappearing into the darkness. The next delivery led me to a house with boarded-up windows. An unsettling feeling crawled up my spine, but I pressed on. A woman with vacant eyes took the food, muttering something about hunger as she closed the door. I stayed hidden, watching her join a group of others who seemed to be waiting for something. The pattern became clear. They were all connected, like pieces of a puzzle I wasn't meant to solve. My instincts screamed at me to run, but my curiosity held me back. I needed answers. One night, after a particularly strange delivery, I tailed one of the customers, the old woman. She walked briskly, glancing over her shoulder every few steps. My heart pounded as we entered the heart of the mysterious neighborhood. She led me to an abandoned warehouse, its rusty doors groaning as she slipped inside. I hesitated but followed, my footsteps echoing in the empty space. As I turned a corner, I stumbled upon a gathering, a circle of people, their eyes wide with anticipation. In the center was a table covered in strange symbols and flickering candles. My breath caught in my throat. They were chanting, their voices low and guttural. In the middle of the ritual stood the guy from the first delivery, now wearing a robe and holding something that glinted in the candlelight. I ducked behind a stack of crates, heart racing. I couldn't make out their words, but the air buzzed with an unsettling energy. It felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. As I tried to process what I'd stumbled upon, a hand clamped down on my shoulder. I jumped, turning to face the old woman. Her vacant eyes bore into mine and she whispered, "You shouldn't be here." Fear gripped me as I stammered out an excuse about getting lost. She studied me for a moment, then gestured for me to leave. I didn't need a second invitation. Story number 2. The night was dark, the kind that makes every shadow seem scarier, every sound more spooky. I drove my car through the fancy neighborhood, following the GPS to the customer's house. The address led me to a big house, tall and grand against the dark sky. As I pulled up to the driveway, the house looked even fancier. Big pillars framed the entrance, and ivy crawled up the walls. A dim lamp by the door barely lit up the area. I checked the delivery details: a meal for 2, special instructions, and a big tip. The notes were odd, saying to leave the order on the doorstep without ringing the bell. Holding the food bag, I walked towards the house. My steps echoed in the quiet night, and the air felt heavy, kind of weird. When I reached the doorstep, I saw a small person behind the glass of the front door. A kid. Their eyes met mine, big and scared, like the darkness outside had gotten into their soul. I hesitated, looking around for any sign of adults. The house stayed quiet, not a sound of life inside. The child pressed against the glass, little hands reaching out. "My parents left," they said, voice barely heard through the barrier. "They told me you'd bring me food. Please don't leave me alone." My heart started beating faster. Instinct told me to call the police, make sure the kid is safe, but the instructions said to drop the food and go. I felt stuck between what I should do and the promise of a big tip. I decided to ask more questions. Are you sure they're not home? Maybe they're in another room? The child shook their head, a tear rolling down their cheek. They left a while ago, said they had to go somewhere important. They always do this. My mind raced. I felt tension building up, like a silent scream asking for an answer. Whatever I chose, there would be results. I grabbed my phone, my fingers shaking, thinking about calling emergency services. As I dialed, the child's eyes widened in terror. No, please. They said you should just leave the food. Don't call anyone. The call connected, and someone asked for details. I stuttered, torn between the child's plea and my responsibility. The child banged on the glass, their desperation growing. I promise I'll be okay. Just leave the food, please, they begged. I hesitated, uncertainty taking over. The child's eyes pleaded, and the big house seemed to close in on us, watching the drama unfold. Against what felt right, I mumbled sorry to the dispatcher and hung up. The child's relief was clear, a heavy weight lifted from them. Thank you, they whispered. I left the bag on the doorstep, a bad feeling growing in my gut. As I turned to leave, the child spoke again, their voice carrying a sad feeling. Can you stay with me until they come back? I'm so scared. The request sent shivers down my spine. I hesitated again, torn between the safety of this child and the rules that told me what to do. A cold wind whispered through the big pillars, a reminder of the dark that covered the night. Against what felt right, I nodded. The child's eyes lit up with gratitude as I stepped inside the dark mansion, its vastness swallowing the weak light by the door. The air inside felt colder, the quiet more intense. I followed the child into a fancy living room, where soft furniture felt like silent guards. The child sat on the sofa, eyes glued to the entrance, expecting their parents to show up. We waited in that dark room, the minutes stretching into forever. The house held its breath, a heavy quiet that settled over us like a blanket. I felt the weight of my decision, the results of choosing the child over what I was supposed to do. Story number 3. The sun went down, casting long shadows as I navigated the cemetery maze. My headlights made the tombstones look like they were dancing in the dark. The app pinged, telling me to make a delivery to this graveyard at twilight. It felt weird, but it was just another drop-off, right? The customer's note was strange. Leave the food on the third tombstone to the right of the big building. Weird, but whatever. Weird requests happen. I shook off the creepy feeling, thinking it's just being in a cemetery at night. I approached the crypt, the big building mentioned in the note. It was silent, like it was holding secrets. The note had specific instructions. Third tombstone to the right. I looked at the names on the graves. It was tough to read in the fading light. The air felt strange, but I put the order, spaghetti and meatballs, salad and wine, on the tombstone and checked the details again. The crypt's door creaked open, making me jump. It was shut tight a minute ago. Maybe it's just old, I thought. I turned to leave, feeling a chill. Then I heard it. The door was creaking open. I quickened my pace, hearing whispers in the air. I tried to ignore it, thinking it's just the wind. But the whispers didn't stop. That's when I heard the door creaking behind me, and I knew something wasn't right. I turned back, my breath catching in my throat. The door that was closed seconds ago now stood open. Fear crawled up my spine, but I told myself it's just an old crypt. Then I heard a rustling noise, and I froze. The figure I saw earlier was there, staring at the open crypt. Hey, I called out, but it just turned toward me. The dim light showed a face I recognized, the person who ordered the food weeks ago. The problem? They were supposed to be dead. I stumbled backward, my mind racing. I didn't expect anyone, the figure said, its voice barely audible. But now that you're here, I suppose you can join us. Join them? Panic hit me, and I took another step back, torn between running and figuring out what was happening. I didn't expect anyone, the figure repeated, the word sending shivers down my spine. But now that you're here, I suppose you can join us. My legs felt heavy as I took a step closer to the crypt. The figure grinned, a wicked expression that made my skin crawl. The crypt's dark interior seemed like a portal to the unknown. The figure gestured for me to enter, and a magnetic pull dragged me toward the opening. As I got closer, the air grew colder, and whispers surrounded me. The figure whispered too, saying words I couldn't understand. It felt like it was trying to pull me into a different world. My instincts screamed at me to run, but my legs felt stuck. Just when I thought I was going to step inside, a police siren wailed in the distance. The figure's grin faded, and it turned away, vanishing into the shadows. I didn't waste any time. I ran until I reached my car, heart pounding and breath ragged. Looking back, the cemetery was silent again, with no sign of the figure. I drove away, leaving the crypt and its mysteries behind.